All right, so what I've got here is a Google Sheet that is collecting all the responses from a Google form. And I surveyed my students to see how they felt about a couple of different learning targets. And I want to take this Google Sheet into something that I can walk away with and drive my instruction further. So first of all, this is a very much jumbled up mess of numbers. I want to be able to kind of visually see this a little bit better. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to highlight all of the cells by clicking up here in the top left corner. I'm going to go to Format, Conditional Formatting. And I'm going to put it as a color scale. And I'm only going to apply this to cells C2 through V. So I'm going to get all of the cells that have the numbers in them. And I'm going to say that the minimum value or the number should be red. So if a student really doesn't feel good about an answer, it'll show up red. If a student feels good about an answer, I want it to show up green. And then I'll say like right in the middle, 3, I'm going to put it as yellow. So now this begins to tell a little bit more of a story. So I can go through here and I can take a look. Wow. So I mean, right off the bat, I can tell that column K is a real struggle. To be able to look at these different answer choices, I can open them up like this. So I know just kind of from a quick glance, my students need to understand how the angle of refraction in a medium using Snell's law. I need to go over this with my students. Very few students, if any, are selecting 5 that they feel really good about it. A couple other things that I can do here. I can insert a row below it, and I can put in a really simple formula. I'm going to put the equal sign, average, and I'm going to average everything in this column. So it's going to be C3, which is the row right beneath this one, all the way down through C. And I'm going to hit enter. And it's going to give me an average number. I can drag that across. And now I have an average score for each one of these different questions that I gave my students. I can make this look a little bit nicer, and I can actually go through here and I can say Format, Conditional Formatting, and I can do the same thing. Color scale, if they really don't feel good about it, it's going to be red. Let's do this. Number set at 1, and then max value set at number 5, and then midpoint number would be 3. I'll make that yellow. So now I've got a pretty good idea, again, visually speaking, of which questions I need to look at first. Again, this one that I noticed right off the bat was a very, very difficult question for my students. But over here, 2.57, that's probably another one that I need to take a look at with my kids. So this was done with a survey. Let's take a look at a Google form that has like some actual answers that I want to go through and analyze. Okay, so this is a Google form that I've collected a bunch of information from my students. Now, Google Forms are actually going to be self-grading, but let's say that this is like, map data, or, I get something from like a DMAC kind of program that just spits out a really large spreadsheet. And I want to try to get to know a little bit of the information that it's telling me. So let's take a look at some of the questions that have correct answers. Okay, so here are my multiple choice questions. I'm going to actually add a row, and this is going to be my correct answer. So I'm going to come in here and it says positive charge and negative charge held near each other are released. As they're moving, they get closer to each other. This causes the force on each other's particle to, the correct answer is increase. So this is basically my row up here is just going to be my answer key. I'm going to pause my recording. I'm going to put all the correct answers up here. Okay, so I've added that row at the very top. I've put in my correct answers, and now I want to do some spreadsheet magic. So I'm going to highlight all of these cells. I'm going to select everything that goes down beneath them. I'm going to come up here to where it says Format, Conditional Formatting. I'm going to put in what's called a custom formula. I'm going to say equals. I'm just going to talk about cell H3 to begin with. H3 equals the top row, which is going to be H1. So now the rows that are going to be the same as H1, or in I and K, and so everything's looking at the column that it's in, they're going to turn green. But there's some issues over here, like there's some ones that say doubles. So what I need to do is I need to make it a static reference. and I'm going to put in here a $ next to the 1. That means that I'm only going to be looking at the first row. So it's always, no matter if it's H3, H100, it's always going to reference the first row in column H. I'm going to make those green. I'm going to add another rule. That's going to say if it is not equal to H1, I'm going to make those red. So now I've got it so that my correct answers are green, my incorrect answers are red. Maybe I want to go and I want to try to get a good idea of a distribution of the different answer choices. So I'm going to add a couple of extra rows. And the way I'm going to do that is just click and go insert one above, insert one above, insert one above, insert one above, and insert one above. And I'm going to get all the different possible answer choices by using a formula called unique equals unique H8 through H. That's going to give me the different answer choices that were possible in this question. I'm actually going to do this. I'm just going to drag it all the way over. So now I've got my answer key at the top. I'm just going to give it a little border right there. Okay, and then here are all the answer choices. And maybe I want to get a distribution of how many students picked each of these different answer choices. Maybe there's some questions that, I taught it incorrectly, or my students have some misconceptions, and I need to go back through and take a look. I'm going to just add a column here. I'm going to use a formula equals count if. I'm going to say I8 through I, comma, and I'm going to say it has to be equal to my top row here at I. So this is going to count how many instances that between I8 and I, all the way down, the students chose decrease as the correct answer. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I need that to be I2. Now it's showing how many times the students chose decrease. I'm going to do the same thing by just dragging down and dragging down. So I know that 93 times the students chose the correct answer versus 7 times they chose stays the same and 4 times they chose decrease. I'm going to add some extra columns, and I'm going to do this for each one of those questions. All right, so now I'm seeing how many times each student has answered each question. So this is actually a pretty good option. So what happens to the electric force between two charges when one is doubled and the distance is doubled? Well, I've got, about a little over half my students had the correct answer of halves, but there's a large number that thinks it's doubled. So I need to go back through and I need to reteach that to my students so that they understand that misconception. Same thing with this question. About half my students got this question correct, but there's a third of my students that did not, and they all thought that this was the correct answer. And the tricky part about this is actually that this is the information that we're going over, which is Coulomb's law. The distance is squared. So for each of those two questions, these two questions, the reason that the students were getting this answer and this answer is that they weren't squaring the denominator. So now I have some quantifiable data that I can go back through, I can reteach to my students, and they'll be able to really understand why. I can even, knowing that I've got the names over here, I can sort my data table. So I can come over here. So I've gone through and I've sorted this column so that I can figure out which students specifically, I'm going to freeze this column right here, which students got this question incorrect. So I can then pull these students during their class periods, and I can make a small group of students that I really need to reteach the concept of that squared value in the denominator. So this is a really useful skill to be able to have, being able to go through a spreadsheet and be able to make a picture of the data. I hope it was helpful.